Our board last year approved a mission for our district that says we're here to inspire and equip all students to pursue futures beyond what they can imagine. They also have a core belief that all students will achieve their full potential. And our board is serious when they say all, they mean all. Because we know no matter how challenged a student may be, or no matter how gifted a student may be, we need to bring out their full potential through the things we do in school every single day. In Fort Bend, that our special education services have not been for all children what they should be. We have a lot of hardworking people that care a lot about your children, but our systems and the way we do things are not always the best. And so we have undertaken a major couple of year project to really study, evaluate, and put plans in place to improve special education services in our district. This meeting is important. We had one of these last night at Elkins High School, and we're here tonight on this side of the district because we want everyone who wants to participate to have a chance to come engage in this type of community dialogue activity. Tonight you're going to hear some things about special education in general, about students in Fort Bend ISD specifically, and some data. And we just want you to listen to the presentation. It'll last about 45 minutes or so. But then we want you to have dialogue around your table, and we also want you to participate in individual surveys about the special education services in Fort Bend today. Your feedback, along with community feedback, we're going to launch a survey Friday that's going to be open for 2 weeks for anyone and everyone to respond to, because we want everyone to have a chance to participate. This meeting is being videoed, it'll be online, and all this will be available for the entire community, even those who couldn't be here tonight can still be a part of it. But we want to gather feedback as part of our bigger picture. You're going to hear a lot of detail about our work, but it involves district level leadership, it involves teachers and principals, it involves some external consultants and facilitators to help us engage in this very important work. And as I mentioned, we have come into this with an understanding that in some schools and some classrooms, we're doing great things for children, but we also know in some schools and some classrooms, some things aren't going very well. And in some cases, it's because of the systems, or maybe we haven't staffed properly. What we want to do through the process is, I simplify it a great deal. I always say our goal is to identify the needs of all the students, so that no matter how intense or how their needs may be, or how little the intensity is, there's a full range of a broad spectrum of needs of disabled children. And we want to identify the full range of needs so that we can then put in place the full range of programs that are required to meet the unique needs of each of those students. So it's not a one-size-fits-all or a rapid identification. We want to have strong, effective ARDs that show parents are full partners with the school and how we serve the students. And we want to fulfill the expectations in every child's IEP with fidelity in the way that it should be fulfilled. So that's what brings us here tonight, is we're building the foundation for a strong program. We're doing the same thing over the next couple of years with bilingual and ESL services, with gifted and talented services, all of these different programs. We want to meet the needs of every child. The special education is where we've started because it's a very large group of students, and we hear a great deal of concern from our community about how we're serving our special education identified students today. So that's why we're here, and so it's just my pleasure to welcome you. We do have some snacks, coffee and things, and cookies over here if you'd like to help yourself, but we're going to be here for an hour and a half or so just engaging you in this important work. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to introduce now our Chief of Staff, Beth Martinez, and she's going to kind of begin the work of just facilitating the process that's going to take place this evening. Where's Beth? There you are.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree, and it's great to be here tonight and see all of you. Thank you for bearing the weather. Glad it kind of held off for us for a little bit. I have some housekeeping things I want you all to be aware of as we begin our evening together. There's restrooms over here. If you just kind of leave the cafeteria and go to your right, there's some restrooms that'll be directly on your right. If you need to take care of your comfort, please do so at any time. And you see the exits here should we need to evacuate, which we do not anticipate that we will, but should there be a problem, we have exits here, and they both take you outside the building. So if we need to access them, you know where they are. All right, our format tonight in the community dialogue is one that we've used over the last 2 years. We worked through a facilities process, a facilities study, a safety and security, a district-wide safety and security assessment and planning, as well as our most recent district-wide feeder pattern and boundary study. And in the very beginning, I remember one of the challenges or one of the concerns from the community being, these events are not really dialogues. I want the microphone and I want to tell everyone in the group my concerns and ask my question. And we listened to that and heard that and then reviewed all of the feedback and information that we received through the community input in this setting over the last 2 years. And here are some things that we've realized and learned and some positives that we bring to you this evening in the way that we're conducting the community dialogue meetings. It's that not everyone gets to have a voice when we have a format of that nature. You do hear from some people, but not everyone is comfortable voicing concerns or asking questions in that type of a format. And this type of a community dialogue setting gives us the opportunity to have conversations with folks you may not know at a table in a small group, and also to provide the district leadership feedback on an individual level and by some consensus conversations and coming to consensus in your group. So it really gives us the input from the community at a much deeper level and a much more individual level than if we might have an event where we are just Q&A all night long. So we do hope that you find the benefit in that this evening. There are many district folks here to help facilitate. You have facilitators at your table, and as Dr. Dupree said, you're going to be getting a lot of information, but then we're going to need information back from you as well. And then we'll definitely need your help in the community as we send that out to the community and ask for your friends and neighbors who couldn't be here tonight to watch the presentation and to provide feedback through an online survey. Every voice in this room and every voice on the online survey matters. Through some of the prior community dialogue sessions, we had community members who would really feel it was important to fill out 50 surveys each. And I will tell you that we sit and read every single piece of feedback. So whether there's 500 documents or one document, it is weighed the same. It is just as important to have one response as it is to have somebody feel like you have to sit and do 500 responses. So please don't feel like you need to do that tonight. The benefit of tonight is sharing your experience, providing feedback to the district, and learning the information that we have for you this evening, and knowing that your voice counts, and we appreciate it very much. I mentioned the online survey. Once the videos are uploaded, which we anticipate will be about Wednesday, at least by Wednesday of next week, then we will have an online survey for a 2-week period and take feedback from the community in that way, and then provide updates along the way. 2 of our presenters are here with us this evening, Dr. Phyllis Hill, who's our Chief Academic Officer, and Dr. Lupita Garcia, who is our, this is a mouthful, Executive Director of Special and Federal Programs. And they're going to share a lot of wonderful information with you tonight as we start this journey. So again, thank you for being here. Please take care of your comfort. Make sure you eat at least 3 cookies before you leave so we don't have a whole bunch left. And enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Good evening. How are you this evening? Good. I'm glad to see you here this evening. It's always good to see parents who are involved and active and seeking opportunities to participate in children's education. So we're glad you're here. If you'll look at this slide, sometimes when we look at programs, for example, special education, we expect to see the words program evaluation. And when you look at this slide, it says developmental program review. So let me tell you why it says developmental program review rather than program evaluation. Our district has had a number of evaluative inputs into our system. In 2013, Texas Education Agency conducted an audit of our special education program. And they found some things that we needed to work on. And we did that, and we submitted then our response, and they said, you pass. Those corrections are complete. But in addition to the end of course and STAR and all of those tests that you hear so much about, the state also issues another report, another report called the Performance-Based Monitoring System. PBMAS is how we refer to it. And in PBMAS, they look at all kinds of things, and they stage districts according to the severity of the problem. It might be a level 1 problem, level 2, level 3. And they look at things that are in special education. They look at how we identify students. They look at where those students are placed to receive their services. They look at how we are serving our English language learners. They look at all kinds of things. We also have had a couple of evaluations through consulting firms. And several years ago, Stetson and Associates conducted an evaluation in this district. But after that, we've had some changes and so forth, and some of the recommendations that they made during that evaluation were not implemented. So what we have done is we've called them back in to work with us in consulting, because what we want to do is be committed to change and improvement so that our students receive the very best education and the best quality services that we can provide. And we're going to do that by responding to these evaluative instruments and also by responding to the feedback that our parents, our community, and our staff give us. And that's why you're here tonight. When we come up with changes, we'll be taking those then and sharing them with our Board of Trustees and our district leadership. And I wanted to say, Dr. Dupree pointed out, over a 2-year period. We've been working on this year. And this is a very large district, and we have a lot of special education students. If we tried to change the entire system before school began next year, do you think that would be a very long-lasting or logical move? No, we would not be able to sustain that. There are some things that we'll need to put into place immediately, some prioritized areas for improvement. But there are also some things that are going to take changes in systems and processes and a lot of work and training so that staff know what to do if we are changing to a different way of doing things. And so that we have cycles of training so that if those staff members leave and new staff members come in, they get the same information and the same training. So now, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Garcia, and she's going to give you a little historical input.
Good evening, thank you. Good evening, and I do want to welcome you, and I'm very happy to see you today. I wish it hadn't rained, because I think we'd have a lot more parents here. Maybe the rain kind of ran them off. But I want to start, before I show you what this slide promises, the evolution of services and how it has happened. I want to start by saying that I don't think there's a single person in this country or anywhere that hasn't been touched in a very good way or in a very, how can I say, caring way by either an adult with disabilities or a child with disabilities. And I'm no exception. You know, I grew up in a home where I had a cousin who had Down syndrome, and my father's youngest sister, who back then we didn't know what was wrong with her. Years later, I studied a lot. I want to know what was wrong with what had happened with Elva, and I feel she was in the autism spectrum syndrome. But the sad part is that I have a very soft spot in my heart for children with disabilities, because when we immigrated to the United States, I was 6 years old, and the law did not allow for children with disabilities to immigrate to the United States. So even though my aunt was an orphan and a young girl, they wouldn't allow him to come with my dad, who wanted to care for her. So we made the bi-weekly trips down to Monterrey, Mexico to go see her, and my dad always took money, and she went from one place to another. So it was a sad thing, and it was a sad thing to see my dad, a grown man, cry when he left, because she would cry. Don't leave me here. So I grew up with all these things and all these memories, so I've always felt that it is my place to be sure that I contribute to a better place for all our children with disabilities. And I certainly hope that I'm true to that every day. I want to, before I show you the slide, I want to tell you that, just to put things in perspective, the first public school opened up in 1820 in Boston. It was about 1900 when we finally had more public schools than private schools. About 1900. So keep that in mind when you look at this slide. So we begin to have public education. I want you to see a little bit here on this slide. What you see here is this first picture, and it says 1964. In 1964, a photographer snuck into an institution to take pictures, wanted to know what was going on in there. And he took pictures, and what you see there is a picture in the institution of a disabled child. A book was written, Christmas in Purgatory, by Burton Black. And it was a very moving book, and that was, I think, a turning point in this country that we needed to pay attention for what we did for children with disabilities. Back in 1964 to 75, there were public schools, but children were not allowed to go to public school if they had a disability. Ambulatory or visual or hearing impaired, or they were 2 or 3 years behind. And it was up to the board or the superintendent to decide if they were going to let you enroll or not. Okay? So this is a landmark book, and let's move up to 1975. Landmark law, passed by Gerald Ford, November of 1975. We know it as IDEA, but it was the very first law that required that we educate children with disabilities in public schools. Okay? But it was a shock to many public schools. They weren't ready. What do we do with these children? Teachers weren't prepared. Higher education institutions didn't prepare teachers. They usually, as it says, they're limited models. It was a pull-out. They'd have them in a room. I heard a parent say yesterday that when she was little, she remembered seeing a child that was taken back and forth to a room in a little wagon, and they never knew why. And you know, it was, to me, I hate to use the word, but rather shameful. You know, but we had a long way to go. And in this country, we've made mistakes, and we can't erase them, but we try to get better. So in 1975, the first IDEA passes, and it begins to talk about faith, and I'll talk about that in a minute, free and appropriate education, but they said you cannot turn these children away. You must educate them. But we didn't know how. So 1997, another landmark law, and it is the reauthorization of IDEA, but this time it has more teeth in it. And it says that children with disabilities are entitled to the least restrictive environment and the same curriculum as regular ed students in regular ed classes to the extent, maximum extent possible. Okay? So that moved the ante up for us as educators, because now we're going to be held accountable for all these children in the same way. So how do we work the curriculum? How do we include them? What is it that we need to do? Move up to where we are today, about 2008. All entitlement programs mention something called RTI, Response to Intervention, and it brings us to today where they said that in some cases we were over-identifying children for special education who really didn't need to be in a special education program. So we went from nothing to more, and then, you know, we're trying to find our balance. And that we needed to work at setting some interventions within the classroom for these children, that maybe it was a matter of how we presented the information, how we accommodated them, rather than just test them and remove them. So in this era that we're in right now, we also have what says there, inclusion confusion. Because a lot of times parents think that you assess them and you know, every child has to have the same thing. And that's not what special education is about. It is about it's a holistic approach to seeing your child and what is the best way for us to provide the best education for that child. So for some kids it is inclusion and for others it isn't. For some kids it's partial inclusion and for others it isn't. So that's where we are today. And so I want to say, and I like to show this because this is not just our journey to make things better, but it is a national journey. And if you can stop and think from 75 to 97, that was 22 years since we were required to educate children, and we still weren't getting it right. And are we there yet? No. But I like to think, I really like to think that we have some years ahead of us that it's going to get even better for these children. It really is, because look at how far we've come from what we do and how we recognize them. And there's so much longitudinal data that shows that a lot of these children can be so successful in many, many ways and contribute. So today we find ourselves looking forward to working with parents, working with you, and making this the best journey possible, not just for your children, but our children of the future as well. I'm going to go over with you what exactly are the responsibilities of special education. Okay, it's very simple. We'll keep it, this is kind of Special Education 101. So we have 5 major responsibilities. If we accept federal monies, and even if we don't, we have to provide these services. And not just to children in public schools, but all children are entitled to this, even if they're in a private school. Okay? So, child find, and I'll explain to you what that is. Number 1. Number 2 is evaluation or assessment of a child, and there's a slide for that. Provision of a free appropriate public education, which we like to term FAPE. And then providing that education to the extent possible in the least restrictive environment. And then transition services for quality of life for these children after high school. So what exactly is child find? And that is very simple. The districts must identify, locate, and evaluate all children suspected of having a disability from birth through age 21. Okay? So we are obligated to post or take out an ad once a year in the newspaper with our statement about child find, where, who to contact, what to do for a child screening. We also are supposed to put a poster at every single school, elementary school as well, for child find. More aggressive districts also send posters to pediatricians' offices and work with parents. And pediatricians also know when they check a child, if they feel like something is just not quite right, you know, developmentally or otherwise, they will refer the parent to the school, you know, they'll give them some guidance as to what to do. That's early childhood education. So that's about 2.5 years is when we begin to do the assessments and on. School age identification occurs when the children are already in school. So how does that happen? Well, your child comes to school, maybe they're in kinder, they're fine, 1st grade, they're fine, 2nd grade, they're fine, 3rd grade, they begin to struggle. Grades are low, they're having difficulty learning, you begin to notice some things. The behaviors begin to manifest themselves because of frustration, etc. And many times you will, if the teacher's noticed it first, she'll contact the parent, contact the counselor, there might be a staffing to talk about what they may be seeing. Your child is still not reading or is 2 or 3 years behind grade level. We want to do some additional assessments. We want to work with them in the classroom in this manner, etc. And there's like a 3-tier intervention system. And if these things that we feel are still not helping the child, then we get parent permission or seek parent permission to do a full assessment for the child. It could be just academic or psychological or both. I'm going to say this. There's a parent in the audience who talked to me and said, I don't have a child in special ed. So I'm going to say this because, you know, I said I would mention it, so I might as well not touch on it. But he says, I feel like my child may have ADD. And I was hoping tonight I could find out what I could do. Well, if you feel that your child has attention deficit disorder, you're the parent, you know the child better than anybody else, you're with them, then what you would want to do, ADD and ADHD is a medical diagnosis. So what you do is you take them to your medical doctor, you talk to your doctor, he will have some forms that he gives you for the school to fill out. Normally it's about 3 teachers fill out those forms, and the school nurse, the school counselor might fill out another one. The doctor fills out one, the parents fill out one, then they go through the whole process of analyzing that, and then come to some conclusions and some further testing. Does every child with ADD or ADHD qualify for special education? No. Okay? They don't, because it has to be pervasive enough or rise to a level high enough where we can put them in special ed under other health impairments. Now, since I've been here 2.5 years, and most recently since we started our advisory committees with parents and having meetings such as this in the task force, what I heard often that kind of concerns me, and when I hear something and I'm concerned, we're going to work it through. And we're going to find out, I like to say we're going to peel the onion. And I like to use the word onion because sometimes peeling an onion makes you cry, and sometimes it does make you cry, because I've been often telling my husband, will say, you're not going to believe this, you know. But that's what happens. You peel the onion and you try to find out what's happening. So in what I've heard is parents say to me, in this district, it's very difficult to get your child tested for special education. That we have gatekeepers, and we don't want the children in special education. And you know what? As a new person to this district, I'm going to say this, I believe that. I tend to believe that. Because in a few minutes, you're going to see some data. The norm, the average, is anywhere between 9 and 10% of a population is identified as needing special services through special education. And ours is right about 6%. But interestingly enough, you'll see some data that's very unique and atypical about the children we have identified and the disabilities. So it's a conundrum. We keep looking at it. But we don't want our parents to feel like, I've asked and nobody will help me. Because we want to help you and we want to leave no stone unturned. Okay, so what about the evaluation? Once we do an evaluation, and we have to have parent permission to do that, you know, there are 13 categories in TEA that would qualify a child for the services. And some of them are not cognitive impairment and are pretty obvious. If you have a child that's deaf or blind, an orthopedic impairment, traumatic brain injury, a speech and language impairment, auditory impairment, visual impairment by itself, autism spectrum, that begins to, these over here begin to fall into the cognitive spectrum or multiple disabilities, emotional disability. A while ago I said ADD, ADHD under other health impaired, or a specific learning disability, or what we call non-categorical early childhood. You heard me talk about early childhood, we screen and identify. Well, they're too young for us to be identifying and putting kind of a label on it. So we just begin, it's developmental, and we wait and see what that brings. So what's the eligibility for special education services? It's a 2-pronged test. And this is where some parents have a little problem with this, and so we have to really educate them, because we're going to be really fair with your child, but we also have to be firm and true to the law. And the law says that the student must have a qualifying educational disability as determined by a multidisciplinary team and have an educational need. So I may be ADD or ADHD, but I may not have an educational need. I'm doing well. And so in my past, in working with parents, they say, but my son or daughter is making C's and B's. They're not making A's. Well, this isn't about making A's, okay? I'll tell you that right now. It is about being successful in school to the extent that you're possible, that we facilitate it for you to maximize your potential. Okay? So what happens then? What is a free appropriate public education? It means that you are entitled to be educated to the extent possible within the least restrictive environment, and we'll have an IEP developed, and if you have a child with special ed, you know what that is, and it will include a specific designated instruction. It may include related services, supplemental aids and services, specialized transportation, and transition services. It is very important that we keep in mind this last statement. The special education is a service and not a place. And a while ago you heard me say inclusion, confusion. Because, you know, if we're not careful, then we're going to move towards rushing to a label for the child or a place for the child. And that's not what special education is about. It's not about where we place you or what we label you, and we shouldn't be labeled, but what we do for you, the services that we provide for you. Well, at this time, that ends my, I'll come back towards the end, but this is your little history lesson and where we've been. And then Dr. Hill's going to address next, but I want to end it by saying that this is an incredible country to live in. And spoke about a true immigrant here, but this is an incredible country to live in because Saudi Arabia, Turkey, many of these countries right now are where we were in 1964. And because of social media and what they're seeing we're doing in the United States, things are beginning to happen all over the world for children with disabilities. And that's really, really inspiring.
Okay. I'm going to share some data with you. And that will be interesting because I'm a former high school English teacher. So we'll wander through she probably should have taken the data. So we'll wander through these numbers and I'll try to tell you what they mean. Actually, I won't try, I am going to tell you. I do know these numbers. But what I want to say is that this information was captured last semester. And so we're always, every day, students are moving in, students are moving out, odds are being held. This is a moment in time to show a critical trend. Remember when I talked to you earlier about the performance-based monitoring system, PBMAS, that the state uses? Well, this is one of the things they look at. They look at how we identify special education students in comparison to our enrollment and group the different demographic groups. And I want to explain this chart. Let's just take, for example here, the Hispanic population. In the United States, there are 24.5% Hispanic students in all schools. Now that's not special education students, that's all Hispanic students. Our nation has 24.5% Hispanic students in our schools. Of that 24.5%, 21% are special education students. Of all special education students in the United States, 21% are Hispanic. Those numbers are very similar, aren't they? Okay? So if we go across to Texas, Texas has a much higher Hispanic population, 51.3%, correct? And of all special education students in Texas, 48.8% are in special education. Now notice with the U.S. trend, slightly lower special education student identification for this ethnic group than the overall enrollment, correct? When we look at the state, pardon me, state, slightly lower than the state's overall population, correct? Now look what happens here. Look at the African American, and let's follow it across. 15.7% of the students in all U.S. schools are African American. Of that group, then when we look at special education students, 19.3% are special education students across the nation, a little higher. In Texas, 12.7% of our state's population, African American students. About 4% higher special ed. Notice it's 4% nation, 4% state. Now let's look at Fort Bend ISD. 29% of our students are African American, of all students. What happens here? That is definitely an outlier, isn't it? And that's what the state says on that PBMAS report. This is a red flag. That's why we put the red arrow on it. This is an issue. Something is wrong here. We need to be looking at this. Why are so many African American students identified for special education? That's an outlier. And that's what we look at. And on that report from the state, it says, you need to look at your special education services because you're over-identifying African American students. When we look at historical trends, look at Fort Bend. The district's enrollment for African American students was 29.8% in 2004, about 10 years ago. Of that percent, 35.7% were African American. Now that's higher. A while ago when we were looking at the nation and the state, it was about 4% higher than the enrollment, right? So it's a little higher already. Then what happened? 2009, we looked, 31.5% of the students in Fort Bend were African American. Now we're up to a little over 8%. Then when we went to 2014, our population slipped down a little bit, 29% African American. But what happened with our identification? So we've had a trend of growing, but we recently, in the last 5 to 6 years, have gone the wrong direction. It was gradually increasing, but in more recent years, more of an increase. Would you say that's something we need to address? We believe that we do. So summarizing that, Fort Bend ISD has a different ethnic makeup than the nation or the state. And you saw that when we looked. We know that our district is one of the most diverse school districts in the nation, in the state. But at the same time, even with our diversity, we shouldn't be identifying one group that or disproportionate with others. And you look at that, and African American students are disproportionately over-identified compared to other groups. And as I showed you in the last slide, it's been increasing over 10 years, and in more recent years, that increase has been even more steep. All right, now we're going to look at the types of disabilities that are represented in our school district and how those compare with the nation. And you can see that the disabilities are down this left column. Let's look over at the state. Here's the state, here's the nation. Okay, so what is unusual here? What is the national trend for autism? 7.1%. State, 10.2%. District, 19.5%. That's quite a bit more. Almost triple the nation and double the state in autism identification. So we have to go back and look at, and that's why we're doing a developmental program review. There are things like this that aren't in an evaluation that we just need to, as Dr. Garcia said, peel that onion. Are these students coming to us identified from outside sources? physicians and so forth? Or are we identifying them within our own system? Or how are these students who were identified early, how are they performing now? Does that seem to be an accurate identification? Look at the learning disability. Remember what Dr. Garcia said earlier about we want students who need services to get the services, but we want students who can be served with response to intervention and mainstream interventions in the regular classroom without special education, with just some accommodations to receive that. Look at our learning disabilities. For the nation, 36% of the students have a learning disability of special education students. 36.9% of the special education students in Texas have a learning disability. These are aligned. What happened in Fort Bend ISD? Do you think we might be missing some students who could use some services and support? We think we likely are. And we need to improve our processes for referral and evaluation and identification. And we need your help in that. Look at the intellectual disability. That's another outlier. Nationally, 6.8%. Here, 9.1. In our district, 15.4, more than twice the national average. And those would be your students who have a cognitive disability. So then we go into the others, and these are much lower percentages. I'm not going to read all of them. I'll leave the slide up there for a little bit for you to look at how we compare. One of the things I do want to point out is with other health impaired, 22.2%. What's the national? 11.6. Is the state aligned with the national here? Yes. What's unusual in Fort Bend? We're double the nation. And most of these students are in ADHD identification. Do you think we might be over-identifying ADHD? Perhaps. So compared with the state and national data, we have higher percentages in autism, emotional disturbances, intellectual disability, and other health impairment. And so that's data that we would want to look at and look at our processes, at our referral processes, at our evaluation processes, and see where we have these very high numbers, are we over-identifying those particular disabilities? When we think about instructional settings, our goal is to serve students, and it's the law, in the least restrictive environment. So that means if students can be served in the mainstream classroom, that we want to put them there. If they can understand curriculum, respond in class, if that is an appropriate class setting for them, we should put them there. If they need more support, then we need to put them in an appropriate setting, but always going with the least removal from the classroom possible for the least amount of time necessary. When we look at self-contained students, I want you to look at what you see here. See anything look a little bit disproportionate to you? So we were talking about over-identification of African American students, more than 60% self-contained, and that number is quite a bit higher. So we know that not only are we over-identifying African American students, but they're not, for the most part, in the least restrictive environment, and we need to address that. And these students, we don't have a lot of students in residential care and off-campus community places. So these are the summary statements for least restrictive environment. Notice that 27% of the special education students are in mainstream classrooms all day. 27%. Less than 21% of the day in a resource room, 18%. So that means a little less than a quarter of the day they're spending in a resource room, 18%. Students who are spending about a quarter to half of their day in a resource room, 23.6%, and more than 60% of the day in a self-contained setting, 25%. Do you think we need to work on least restrictive environment? Yes, we do. I told you, or if I didn't tell you, I'll tell you now, we are being pretty transparent about where we need to work because we need your help. And we want you to work with partners with us. These are your children. You care about them, we care about them. And that's why we wanted you to be here tonight to give us your feedback. So summarizing, African American students make up almost half of the students in the 3 instructional settings. Resource room less than 21%, resource room 21 to 50%, and self-contained settings. We had a parent advisory group, and each principal asked a parent from his or her campus to serve on this parent advisory group to try to get information from parents about how they felt about the services their students were getting, what kind of parental involvement they were having on campus, what kind of support they might need. And as Dr. Garcia and her group met with these parents, they said, we would really like to reach out to other parents, and we cannot share your email information with other parents. Now, it doesn't matter how good the intention is, that would violate your privacy. So the parents said, well, is there some way you can get this questionnaire out to the other parents? And yes, we can do that. So we tried to send out hard copies, and that didn't work very well. We pushed it out through school messenger, and I still think that didn't work very well because we only received 173 responses. And so we knew that that is not a good method to get widespread feedback. Therefore, we're here tonight in community dialogue meetings, 2 of them this week. It isn't that their feedback, those 173 had some very good feedback, and we're taking that in, but it's not from enough parents. Now we're going to move on to our individual survey. And if you are at a table that does not have a table facilitator, if you would move to a table where we have a table facilitator, and so there are several people that can be in discussion with you. We're going to have you fill out your individual survey.
He can switch it over.
We'll take a break while you complete your individual survey.
There's 2 chairs over here. What I'd like for you to do is to have just one facilitator per table and as many parents as possible. This is a parent feedback, and I know we have some staff with us, and you're welcome to walk around and help us, but we need to have as many parents as possible. There's 2 chairs here. There's 3 here. We can add another one. But please move to fill up the table so that we can get this information from you.